Hi, so as promised, we're going to be talking about some other ME studies in this episode, and we're going to start with a very recent one. We're going to look at a 2-day cardiopulmonary exercise test on ME patients. That type of exercise test is exactly what it sounds like. You get the test subject to exercise to exhaustion, like on a treadmill or a stationary bike, twice over 2 days. A fun fact, this type of exercise test was effectively abandoned decades ago because researchers found that even very sick patients with very serious diseases are able to produce the same amount of energy from one day to the next. That's true for pretty much anyone with any disease, with ME being the only exception. Well, technically not the only exception, but we will get to that later. There have been multiple small-scale 2-day cardiopulmonary exercise tests examining ME patients in the past, since they're a good way to measure how bodies cope with exercise. And this latest, larger-scale test confirms some really unique findings from past research. But before we jump into the study, I'm going to need to give you a very brief crash course on some human biology, since in order for this research to make sense, we need to understand what aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration are. You've almost definitely heard those terms before, so I'll try to keep this explanation short and simple. Respiration here refers to the process of making energy that happens inside cells. Aerobic respiration is our body's default setting. With this kind of respiration, our cells use glucose from the food we eat and oxygen from the air we breathe to make energy. This results in the byproducts of water and carbon dioxide being created, which we can very easily expel from our bodies. When you're at rest, all the cells in your body, except your red blood cells, are doing this kind of respiration all the time, and it's what keeps them alive. Anaerobic respiration happens at times when your body cannot sufficiently supply its cells with oxygen to meet energy demands, like when you're running or doing other kinds of vigorous exercise. When cells can't get hold of enough oxygen fast enough, they switch over to anaerobic respiration, whereby glucose alone is used to make energy. This process is kind of your body's last resort when it comes to making energy because it's less efficient than aerobic respiration, and also because it creates lactic acid as a byproduct, which is the substance that makes your muscles sore after you exercise. Aerobic respiration is generally the better option out of the two because it produces more energy than anaerobic respiration. Still, anaerobic respiration is a very clever way for our bodies to squeeze out just a bit more energy at times where access to oxygen is limited. Now we know what those two terms mean, we can talk about the study. It was led by an exercise physiologist called Betsy Keller, and it had ME patients matched to sedentary controls, and then everyone was made to do a 2-day cardiopulmonary exercise test, and the results were compared between the patients and the control subjects. This study made some very interesting and also very concerning findings. Even on day one of this 2-day test, the patients with ME were performing worse than the control subjects. The test found that lower oxygen consumption and lower carbon dioxide production was measured in ME patients compared to healthy controls, and it also showed that ME patients reached their peak effort much faster than the controlled subjects. This suggests that, for some reason, the cells in ME patients' bodies switch over to anaerobic respiration much sooner than they should be when put under stress. It's like our bodies have a preference for this less efficient way of making energy. It's really bizarre. The researchers posit that problems with blood flow in these patients might partly explain why there is more anaerobic respiration going on in their cells compared to healthy controls. All the test subjects' pulse pressure was measured as part of this study, which is good because pulse pressure is an important indicator of cardiovascular health. A narrowed pulse pressure can indicate problems with blood flow, and that's exactly what was measured in the ME patients. The study found that there was a total resistance in the blood vessels to blood flow in these patients, and of course, if your blood isn't flowing properly, that's going to impact the delivery of oxygen to the cells in your muscles. Problems with blood flow aside, it's on day 2 of this 2-day test where shit really hits the fan for ME patients. On the second day, researchers found that everything they measured in these patients had actually reduced compared to the first day. They saw a reduction in the amount of time it took to reach peak exercise in ventilatory measures, in heart rate, oxygen pulse, and in rate pressure product, all of which shows that ME patients' ability to produce energy had actually been further damaged by the first day of exercise. In contrast with this, the sedentary controls displayed a normal recovery from exercise, and they were able to produce the same amount of energy on day 2 as on day 1. I cannot emphasize enough to you how extraordinary this finding is. We ME patients are an incredible anomaly in the world of medicine because exercise directly makes us worse. These results are so unusual and unexpected that the very first time a 2-day cardiopulmonary exercise test was done on ME patients, the world of exercise physiology essentially ignored the results because they were so anomalous it was unbelievable. Our bodies display an unprecedented intolerance to exercise. There is also another smaller scale exercise test that was done on ME patients, which further illustrates this bizarre finding. In this test, 18 female ME patients were matched with 17 healthy yet sedentary controls, and everyone had their blood samples collected immediately before an exercise test to exhaustion, and then again 15 minutes after the exercise, and then again 24 hours after the exercise. These blood tests were used to measure the presence of extracellular vesicles, or EVs, in the subjects. Extracellular vesicles are inconceivably small, and they are regularly being emitted by our cells as a way of communicating with the rest of our bodies. They are essentially tiny bags filled with DNA, RNA, proteins, amino acids, and lipids. The study found that the EVs in ME patients' blood were highly disrupted. After exercise, the study found fewer proteins in EVs, reduced protein expression in EVs, and a delayed increase in several EV proteins in ME patients compared to healthy controls. Summarized simply, the study found that, bizarrely, ME patients' bodies were simply unable to correctly respond to exercise on a cellular level. Their bodies were reacting as if nothing was happening at all. It's almost like they just didn't recognize that the exercise was taking place. Keep in mind as well that you have to be one of the less affected patients to even attempt something like an exercise test, so God knows how badly fucked up energy cellular metabolism is in the severely and very severely affected patients. Moving on from exercise tests, there's honestly so much else going wrong in our bodies as ME patients that I would run out of time for this episode if I were to talk about it all in detail. So instead of that, I'm just going to rapid fire share some more information about what some various other studies have found. First of all, a researcher called Dr. Jared Younger and his team have found quite compelling evidence to suggest that there is a chronic low-level inflammation going on in our brains. Concerningly, but also incredibly, he found that ME patients on average have a higher internal brain temperature than we should have. It's not high enough to do any lasting damage, thankfully, but still, it is high enough to suggest inflammation. Younger also theorizes that the microglia in our brains are chronically activated, microglia being cells found in the brain which control the immune response, among other things. He and his team are doing some amazing research on this at the moment, but this is still just a theory, albeit a very compelling one, and has yet to be proven. Other miscellaneous studies have found increased oxidative stress in us ME patients, as well as chronic activation of our immune systems, T cell exhaustion, the presence of autoantibodies, or antibodies which attack our own bodies, abnormalities in our gut microbiome, evidence of central nervous system dysfunction, evidence that viral reactivation might play a role in the disease, reduced levels of cortisol, reduced grey matter in our brains, and reduced brain blood flow. There also seems to be some level of genetic predisposition with ME, and potential genetic causes are currently being investigated in a study called Decode ME, which is taking place in the UK. Any way you look at it, there is clearly a wealth of evidence to show that ME is a real biological disease which has a massive impact on numerous different systems in our bodies. So, why is it that this clearly very serious and common disease has remained all but ignored up until now? Why does it continue to be ignored, even in the face of concrete evidence that proves it's real? In order to understand that, we're going to have to look at the history of ME, and I'm going to warn you now, it's going to get really depressing. The history of ME is an infuriating story. It's a carousel of bullshit, but still, I hope you'll join me in learning about it.